Good evening and welcome to the study session of the City Council of the City of Moreno Valley. The City Council receives a separate stipend for CSD meetings. I now call this meeting to order on February 11th, 2025 at 6:02 p.m. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Councilmember Gonzalez. Please rise.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Thank you. Councilmember Bernard,
Here.
Councilmember Delgado,
Here, ma'am.
Councilmember Gonzalez,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Baca Santa Cruz,
Here.
and Mayor Cabrera is absent.
Staff introductions, please.
Patty Rodriguez, City Clerk.
Paul Bradvica, Deputy City Clerk.
Sonia Gomez, Management Assistant.
Stephen Quintanilla, City Attorney.
Brian Mohan, City Manager.
Lana Jimenez, Assistant City Manager over Administration, Chief Financial Officer, City Treasurer.
Sean Kelleher, Assistant City Manager Development.
Angelica Frausto-Lupo, Community Development Director.
Melissa Walker, Director of Public Works.
Jeremy Bubnick, Director of Parks and Community Services.
Robert Cardenas, Human Resources Director.
Keith Gemmell, Acting Economic Development and Housing Director.
Thank you so much. Moving on to public comments on matters on the agenda only. Pursuant to the Brown Act, public comments shall be limited to only those items on this study session agenda. Each person shall be allowed a total of 3 minutes to comment on each item on this study session agenda. The Mayor Pro Tem may, however, reduce the total amount of time for all speakers to comment on any given item if there are numerous persons requesting to comment on the same item that may hinder the City Council's ability to complete its business. If a total time limit is placed on public comment for any given item, each person shall be provided with the same amount of time to comment. The city now offers language translation services through a free app called Wordly. The app automatically translates a variety of languages into English and vice versa. To use this service, please scan the QR code at the speaker's sign-up table. For those who are visually impaired, please use your earphones or earbuds to listen to the verbal translation. If you do not have any listening devices, please let the city clerk know that you need to borrow one for the meeting.
La ciudad ahora ofrece servicios de traducción de idiomas a través de una aplicación gratuita llamada Wordly. Si gustan usar este servicio, avísele a la secretaria y entregue una tarjeta para hablar. Para usar la traducción, escanee el código QR que está en la mesa.
Finally, in order to preserve the meeting decorum, council and staff will not respond during public comments. The first item the council will be discussing tonight is EMD history, current developments, and future projects in Moreno Valley. Are there, let's see, shall we do the presentation first? Okay. We'll do public comments after the presentation. That way if they have questions.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council. My name is Joe Mawad. I am the General Manager at Eastern Municipal Water District. So our pleasure to be here tonight to share with the council and your team an update on Eastern Municipal Water District, as well as an update on different capital projects that are currently in construction, as well as future planned projects in the city. We have a great deal of activity that we coordinate with the entire team, and I just want to acknowledge the city staff, Brian and everyone else who we worked with over the years. They've been an incredible partner for us here at the Eastern. So with that, we do have a presentation. First, I wanted to mention that 2025 is our 75th year anniversary as a water agency. We were established in 1950, and over the years, we've grown to be the 6th largest water retailer in the state of California. And we're very proud of our rich history. And we're going to have an event in October, and we would love for the city council members and your staff to join us in that celebration in October of this year. More details will be forthcoming. So a little bit, as I mentioned, a little bit of history. We were established in 1950, originally to serve the Hemet San Jacinto Valley, primarily to serve ag and dairies. but again, over the years, we've expanded significantly. Currently, we serve 682 square miles of service territory, not only primarily in western Riverside County, but also extending into northern San Diego County. And I'll touch upon that because that extension into San Diego County happened recently over the last year and a half. We serve a population of approximately 1 million residents and rapidly growing in our region. Our region is the fastest growing region in the entire state. We're unique in that we are not only a water provider, we're a wastewater provider as well as recycled. And we're also unique in that we're only 43% built out. Meaning when we look at the land use plans that the city has adopted, as well as the other cities that we serve and the county of Riverside, there is still tremendous amount of growth that we are anticipating. Part of our job is to anticipate that, to plan ahead and make sure we can accommodate the growth that is occurring and will occur well into the future. We are one of 26 member agencies of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. One of our board members, Director Jeff Armstrong, represents us on the Metropolitan Board. So this exhibit shows our service territory extending from Moreno Valley all the way down to northern San Diego County. As you're aware, Director Dave Slauson represents this city and this region of our service territory. We also have 4 other elected board members. Currently, Director Steve Corona serves as president of our board. We have approximately 600 employees serving our constituents with an annual budget of $619 million for this current fiscal year. That includes a very extensive capital improvement program, which we want to talk about tonight. And it's $785 million that we plan to invest in our infrastructure over the next 5 years. A good portion of that is secured via external funding support. We have funding support from both local, regional, as well as state and federal agencies that we partner with. And as I mentioned, we're the 6th largest agency in the state, and Dr. Armstrong represents us on the Metropolitan Board. The exhibit, you'll see there Fallbrook and Rainbow. And both those agencies, they continue to operate as retail water agencies, but they did decide, and their communities voted in support of detachment from the San Diego County Water Authority. Fallbrook joined us in January of 2024, and more recently, Rainbow joined us end of last year as well. So that's quite unusual to have water agencies change essentially wholesale providers, and for them, we are a wholesale provider. But primarily, as you know, those communities are primarily ag. There's a lot of avocado that is grown in that region, and the cost of water is very important to them. And they felt that coming over to Eastern and being part of the Eastern family, they can have access to more affordable water supply. So as I mentioned, we are the 6th largest in the state, but in terms of Riverside County, and this gives you kind of a comparison to other agencies. Statewide, we're right after San Francisco utilities, and within the county itself, we are the largest retailer by far. So our core services, as I mentioned, drinking water, wastewater, and recycled water. Drinking water, we have approximately 170,000 accounts and growing. We sell just over 74,000 acre feet of water. 1 acre foot is enough for about 2 to 3 families a year. And we import water from the State Water Project via Metropolitan Water District, but we also have access to Colorado River supplies and Diamond Valley Lake, which is key to our water supply resiliency and diversity. We also have our own local resourced water, including wells, as well as a brackish desalination plant, including a brackish well. So we have a very diverse water supply portfolio, as I'll show here later. On the wastewater side, about 279,000 equivalent dwelling units that we serve, 4 operating reclamation plants, including one in the city of Moreno Valley. We currently have a capacity of approximately 77 million gallons per day that we can treat. We're running around 50 million gallons per day. The recycled waterfront, we are one of the leaders in the country, frankly, when it comes to serving recycled water. In a typical year, we utilize 100% of the recycled water we generate from our reclamation plants. In wet years, obviously, our customers will turn off the tap, if you will, for recycled water. So we end up filling our seasonal reservoirs, and In wet years, we do discharge some of that water down in Temescal Creek. But average year, we use 100% of that recycled water. The significance of that is that for every drop of recycled water we use, we have to import less water from the Colorado River and from the state delta, which means cost savings to our customers. We sold over 27,000 acre feet of recycled water last year. Extensive agriculture in our service area that uses recycled water. Over 10,000 acres of ag land still uses recycled water in our service territory. So our water supply portfolio, this gives you a snapshot. 50% of our water is imported via Metropolitan Water District. Again, the sources are Colorado River, as well as State Water Project, and also access to Metropolitan stored water, including Diamond Valley Lake. Recycled water makes up more than a third, and that's significant. In the absence of that water, we would have to import more costly supplies. Our brackish desalination makes up about 10% of our water. Essentially, we have naturally occurring salts in part of our groundwater basin, and we have 3 operating treatment plants using reverse osmosis technology. We remove those salts, and they're all located down in Menifee. That water is otherwise not drinkable. It's through our investments that we've made that now we can use an otherwise undrinkable water source that we treat. It's an important part of our reliability. That amount of water, that 10%, serves about 30,000 households in our service territory. We also have groundwater, both in Hemet, San Jacinto, as well as parts of Moreno Valley and the city of Paris. And essentially that water is our least costly source of supply. So just a few takeaways since the year 2000. Our population has continued to grow, as the city is aware, at a rapid pace. Over the last 25 years, our population more than doubled, 115%. However, our customers have become very efficient in terms of water use. In fact, it's not only existing customers, it's the development that occurs in our service territory. The development, per the guidelines adopted by the city and per the county, there is no non-functional turf allowed in front yards. It's only drought-tolerant landscaping in front yards. Low-flow devices inside the home. All those measures are having an impact on how much water is consumed for our average customer. So we're very proud of the fact that our customers have taken on all those best practices and they've reduced their consumption by about 50% on a per capita or per person basis. Desalination, as I mentioned, we started the program over 20 years ago, and now we have 3 operating plants. We produce about 14 million gallons per day of drinking water, and that's a significant, not only local resource, but frankly, there's so many different benefits. It allows us to continue expanding our recycled water program because by removing salts from the ground, you're able to continue expanding use of recycled water. It creates that offset that is needed by the regulators. And then, of course, recycled water. As we've grown, we have more recycled water that we have put to beneficial use, and we continue to construct purple pipe systems. We put parks and other facilities, HOAs, golf courses, all those facilities in our service area where we can, where it's economically feasible, we connect them to recycled water. So I want to shift gears a bit. I know all of us have been tracking the tragic events that have occurred in the Pacific Palisades and Altadena. And unfortunately, it's just been devastating to those communities. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about the fire resiliency of each region. I wanted to share with you what we have done over the years to provide that reliability and resiliency in our water system. But I do want to be clear that conventional water systems are designed and constructed for structural fires. They're not necessarily constructed for wildfires. And the pace and unprecedented magnitude of the wildfires in LA was such that the pressures dropped and they couldn't maintain flow, frankly, in the hydrants. I want to just make that known that systems are not designed for those types of unprecedented conditions. It doesn't mean that there are not steps that you can take to provide a more redundant, more reliable, more secure water supply system, which we have done. And I wanted to share some of what we have done over the years. One is, as I mentioned, we have a very diverse water supply portfolio. We don't rely on one source of water supply. We have multiple sources of water supply, both locally as well as imported supplies. And we maintain a system that we know is critical for routine fire suppression efforts by providing redundancies in the system, meaning we have interconnections. If there are fire hydrants being utilized and the pressure starts to drop, we have those interconnections, be it from other pressure zones that can drop the water from the other storage tanks, or frankly from our neighboring agencies with Western and with Rancho. We have emergency interconnections so we can maintain pressure in our system. So I think all of that is important to having a reliable and redundant water supply. When we have high-risk events, such as the public safety power shutoffs, the PSPS events, we make certain, because during that time, there's a high risk of fires. We make sure all of our tanks are topped off, meaning we don't cycle our tanks up and down. We make sure they're always full in case there is a need to fight fires. Those kind of operational changes are routine when it comes to red flag conditions. We have over 55,000 hydrants in our service territory, and again, continue to expand. But what we have done is we have implemented a program where we do spot checks on those hydrants in high-risk areas where there's likelihood of wildfire. We send out our crews. We make sure the lateral and the valve to that lateral is open and that the hydrant is functioning. And also, we have routine maintenance on our hydrants that we conduct. In addition, as I mentioned, the PSPS events have been significant to us. This past January, we had over 120 of our facilities on a list by Edison that are subject to a potential shutoff of power. Of that 120, we had actually over 60 that were shut off in terms of power. So to mitigate that, we deployed 24 generators to sites. And we did that before the actual shutoff. As soon as we were aware of high wind conditions, of the potential for power outage through the PSPS notification system, we deployed generators. And frankly, many of those sites that were affected, they had permanent generators on site. So many of our facilities do have permanent generators that can operate during a power outage. And frankly, during the whole PS event, which was probably the most impactful we've experienced over the last many years. This January was the most impactful event. No EMWD facilities were out of commission. All of our pump stations were operating. All of our lines continue to be pressurized. All of our tanks were full. And I think we did all the right things to make sure we have those facilities energized and capable to serve the system and the firefighters. We also do other routine maintenance to make sure we're protected and our facilities are protected. For example, weed abatement around our facilities or constructing walls. In some cases, we've had to purchase either easements or property surrounding our facilities so we can clear the brush and we make sure that we're not prone to damages from potential fires. And then I think one important thing that often is overlooked, we have significant amount of water storage reservoirs and tanks, open reservoirs, recycled water, and we also have Lake Skinner, we have Lake Paris, we have Diamond Valley Lake. All those reservoirs, during a fire, Riverside County Fire will use those to utilize them via helicopters to basically fill up their firefighting needs and deploy those resources accordingly. We've seen those helicopters use our facilities to make sure they have access to water when needed during a firefighting event. So with that, we were going to transition and talk about EMWD projects within the city of Moreno Valley. And for that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to our Senior Director of Engineering, Mr. Sean Stone.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening, council members. So as Joe said, we're going to talk a little bit about the several mini projects we have going on in the city. So first one I'd like to talk to is probably our largest project that is under construction right now in the whole service area, and that's our Paris North Groundwater Contamination Prevention Remediation Program. The little background on the project, the Paris North Basin has been impacted by non-point contamination from various industries and activities in the northern portion of our service area. The objective is to limit the contamination spread, accelerate the cleanup of the aquifer, and then protect that aquifer as a source of water for local. That secondary thing reflects even more of that local water supply that Joe talked about for resiliency and low-cost water. And this, we were blessed to, through the Prop 1 process, to receive $62 million in funding towards the project. So It's made up of several components. There are 4 well sites, 6 well sites, 4 off-site, 2 on-site. Wells 65 and 66 are located along Ironwood Avenue, west of Paris Boulevard. Those are both under construction. The treatment facilities, which is a centralized street on Paris Boulevard, also contains wells 206 and 207, the 2 on-site wells. We are actively under construction on all of these. The project duration for the large site is about 30 months. We partnered with the city to find a well location in the city yard on Santiago, which is our well 208. We began construction there in last year. We have ongoing construction activities. If you drive by the city yard, you'll see the building out there off on the east side. And finally, well 209 in Victoriano Park. The city can remember we drilled this site, impacted the park. We've brought it back down to the small area. Most of the area has been restored. We're looking to complete this project by the end of fall of this year. So a little bit more. We are in all of the streets indicated that you can see in the graphic. You can see the well 65 and 66 site. The only pipeline we have left under construction is the Phase 3 pipeline running north and south on Paris Boulevard. The well 206, 207 site indicates where the centralized treatment facility is there in the center. The Phase 1 pipeline we completed more than a year and a half ago, and this was in conjunction with a city project building a storm drain on Bay Avenue. We worked together to get in there to minimize impacts to the residents. And then the longest pipeline, the Phase 2, which is completed, runs north-south to our wells 208 and 209 site. Smattering throughout the city, we have our monitoring well projects, which are required by the regulators. There's 15 locations, and we talk about 3 groups of wells. We broke them up into group A, B, and C. A and B are construction. In fact, all 3 groups are under construction right now. There's 14 locations currently working through wells 1 through 7. When I talk about the wells, there are actually multiple casings that go down to different levels in the aquifer so we can monitor the groundwater. Each one of these wells has 4 different water level measurements within it. And we're looking to complete all of the well work by this summer. So the Paris North Pipeline Phase 3, the one that is still under construction, we're happening to work on Paris Boulevard between Hemlock and Fur. The traffic control there between Hemlock and Sunnymead is actually going to be coming down in the next few days, which I'm sure everyone is excited to hear. We will have some work continuing between Sunnymead and Fur for a couple more weeks, and then we'll be wrapping up the final paving here in the next couple of months. So I know work on Paris Boulevard, Melissa and her team have been very gracious in working with us to create an efficient project so that we can move the construction along and not be out there for, not have the contractor move in and set up tents and live. So thank you. Moving on to the Kitchen and Iris sewer replacement project. This one is about 3,500 linear feet of 24-inch diameter sewer. We are actually done with the sewer line maintenance as of a couple of weeks ago as we were preparing this presentation. There are housekeeping items and some demolition work that needs to happen, some abandonment of an old pipe throughout the alignment. We're anticipating completion at the end of this month, and then the final paving, because this is part of a project I will be discussing in a few minutes. Another partnership with the city will be set for the spring of 2025. So segueing into that partnership project is the pavement restoration project. Back in May of 2022, we entered into an agreement with the city to partner on paving. As the council is aware, that was one of the mandates. You wanted to expend paving money and increase that cycle. Well, with our projects overlaying there, the last thing either staff wanted to do was to have new paving come in, be laid down, and then have us come in and tear it right back up. So we worked together for a quality project, working together to come up with parallel schedules and overlaying. As you can see here, our required work from our construction is shown in green, and the red portion is the city partnership, so that when we're done, that entire half of the street on Alessandro will be clean and brand new with no new cuts. And as it says there on that last bullet, the goal was to minimize community impacts. From a size and scale of the project, you can actually see here, the Phase 1 work is all completed. Phase 2 exists for our Phase 3 and Phase 2 pipelines there. And then the city-led contracts where you can see those were taken care of. Again, the Cactus 2 feeder Phase 1 and the Pettit pressure zone were the red ones, and those are complete and done. And then in spring of 2025, we'll be getting those Paris North pipelines along Paris Boulevard, as well as picking up the Kitching and Iris Avenue sewer. Moving on to the East Merom Valley Sewer Planning and the SR 60 crossing, we had gotten inquiries from the community, a development just to the north of the 60 freeway out near Merino Beach. So we constructed a sewer crossing at what will be the projection of Oliver Street through the last vacant lot available on the south side of the 60. This project was a fairly quick turnaround in terms of construction, long time in the planning and making to get it to that point. Essentially, it's a 15-inch sewer connection to Eucalyptus. We started construction in October of 2024 and finished it in December. And that included a full tunnel. You can see in the blue outline there that we tunneled underneath the freeway onto the property. So looking to the future, some upcoming projects. The Cactus 2 feeder phase 2. This is one of special consideration, and we're doing a lot of extensive coordination with Melissa and her staff, looking at traffic impacts, work hours, and how we're going to accomplish essentially 5.25 miles of pipeline, primarily along Alessandro. We do start at just past Paris Boulevard on the wider section of Alessandro and go all the way to the east to the narrower section. There are portions of it where we're looking at night work, as well as off hours to try to make this work and not impact the residents. The estimated construction duration of the project is about 24 months. Probably the first 6 months of that is setting up the project, notifying the public, getting our contractual submittals in for materials and whatnot, but active construction will probably be about 18 months. We're in the final design phase and coordinating the final traffic control submittals with Melissa's team, and we're looking to start construction for this one in late 2027 for a delivery in 2029, early 2030. So another storage project, this is the Judson tank, and this is out off of Paris Boulevard. It's a 2.2 million gallon tank. You can see the property there in the hills. It's going to be grading some new pipeline as well as some street improvements along Judson Street / Old Paris Boulevard. We're in the final design refinement phase. We're working with local owners to finalize some easements for drainage pipes and whatnot. Once this starts, the estimated construction is anywhere from 2 to 2.5 years. This is a series of projects, the Dale 2194 pressure zone improvements. So the first one is labeled the 21 zone improvements. And what this is, it addresses storage and water system deficiencies, as Joe indicated. We look to have a quality, resilient system, and this is one of those places where we're looking to improve the area. We're going to construct a little bit, about a half mile of 12-inch pipeline from Calmia to Marl Street and Roxburgh Court. We've got some check valves to move to interconnect a couple of the pressure zones up there. We will upgrade pressure reducing valves to increase flow in the area. And we were going to be abandoning 2 booster stations, and one of the projects I get to will show the replacement of one of those in a different location. We are in the 100% design submittal review, so we're on the verge of being ready to bid these projects. The next one is the replacement booster station. We've heard of this as the Calmia booster station project. It replaces an old booster station, as you can see in the lower right photo, that's reached the end of its useful life. It actually took a fairly severe amount of damage during an earthquake, so we've got a temporary structural frame inside the building while this project was being designed. It does increase the pumping capacity in the area, which provides additional system reliability, and in partnership with Sean, we worked through some landscaping challenges in the area and modified the walls to create a better setback for the neighborhood. Once the project starts, we will be about 20 months, and we're anticipated to begin that later this year. The Covey transmission pipeline, as I said, this is a series of pipelines along the northern portion of the service area, about 3,000 feet of 18-inch. Same goal is to create a much more robust, resilient system in there. We're at 100% design, and once construction starts, we'll be about 15 months along Franlew and Jacelyn Avenue. And the Indian Street sewer crossing, and as I said, there's just a couple of projects we have going on in the city. This was to replace a 10-inch sewer within Indian Street with a new 15-inch sewer to accommodate growth in the northern portion of the service area. We actually broke this into 2 projects. With the Woodspring Suite Hotel coming in, we accelerated a portion of it to construct the piece we needed on their property so that we would not impact their opening. And so now we're going to be coming back to finish the project, and that will include tunneling under the freeway, as you can see there, and connecting to our sewer system in Sunnymead. It'll be about a 12-month construction project, and we're looking to start that this summer. And that brings me to the end of the number of projects we had. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure Joe is available for questions as well.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Before we open up public comments, we're going to open up to questions from my colleagues. So, Ed, go ahead.
Thank you guys very much for that excellent presentation. We know of some projects like the Paris and up on the Covey, and because of the construction, the visual construction, but a lot of stuff that we don't know about because you guys are doing a good job underground. So thank you for that. And thank you for, in my district, the sewer line going under the freeway up on the north end of over there off under the freeway. So thank you guys very much for that, because it's long time overdue. I've been on council for 3 years, and that was a hot topic every year. So thank you for that. One of the questions I was going to talk about were the infrastructure readiness for the PSPS, and thank you for describing all that. That's great to know for the city of Moreno Valley. One thing I would ask though is like a little better coordination. I live up on the north end there, where you guys stored all the stuff for Retchie Canyon. That little yard that you guys have right before Retchie Canyon, and the street was paved, and then you guys came in, did your work, and then it was repaved. So it's all done now, but I was getting the business for a long time when you guys were doing your construction. But thank you for getting it done and coming behind your the work and fixing it. So one of the things that was asked to me is, why did they coordinate a little bit better with the city with our pavement improvement plan? So just keep that in the back of your mind. I know you guys probably heard about it too.
No, we appreciate that feedback, council member, and we're always striving to coordinate seamlessly with the city team. But unfortunately, construction sometimes is disruptive, at least on a temporary basis. So the magnitude of the number of projects, as Sean mentioned, that we have ongoing in the city, frankly, is just significant. I don't think there's any other city in our service territory where we're taking on so many different investments in our infrastructure. And I think that's great for the constituents, because they're going to have a better system, a better level of service, reliability, redundancy. But to your point, we're going to strive. We're going to continue to strive to work with the city, make sure we're cohesive and streamlined in all of our efforts.
Well, for the amount of work that you guys are doing that you outlined in your presentation, I think it shows that you guys do care, and you guys are working on making sure that the coordination is there. But just a couple little, glitches, I guess, or not even that, but just the coordination issues. But thank you guys.
No, I absolutely, Council. And I will say that in addition to obviously Sean and I, we have a team of public affairs. And in fact, Alma is here today, and Consuelo is part of our team. So they're very much in tune with what's going on in the community. And we have other community events. We have whenever there's a project, we make sure that everyone has our numbers. Everyone can reach out to us. So if there's an issue, we try to get on it right away and address it right away. But I'm not going to say that we are 100% perfect. There's always things that could be done better. And I think, Sean went through a lot of projects, but to your point about the sewer under the freeway, we're not going to bore you with everything that went on to be able to accomplish that. But it's sometimes very challenging working with different stakeholders and different interests, if you will. But fortunately, we're able to get everything lined up in such a way that we have the least impact that we can on the community.
Thank you, guys.
Again, so thank you for coming out and discussing some of this. So I'm noticing all the projects that you all have coming up, and all of them, if not 95% of them, are all starting in 2025. So my concern is capacity to complete these projects. There was a project that sat where we were getting calls at the city. Why aren't you guys finished repaving? Why aren't you guys making sure this is done? There's a dip, there's a hole. And when we finally got to the bottom of it, it was a project that was started, by you all, and then for whatever reason hadn't been picked back up and finished for a long time. So I come from a place of concern for the capacity to attack this many projects at one time, with everything starting in 2025, with maybe one or two of these wrapping up in 2025. We just heard that one that's going to start, but you know, it'll be 30 months, and by the time we're done, it'll be basically 2030. So my constituents, and the concern that I have, because I have a number of these projects down in my area, is the capacity to get these done. And although I'm appreciative of you working with the city, realistically, are we able to hit these goals and these marks the way we've set, so that it doesn't actually disrupt the community? And, you know, they have a bunch of streets that are ripped up in different sections as they're trying to avoid areas.
Thank you for that comment, Councilwoman. And I'll start, and then I think Sean can also add a little bit. I agree with you that you know, the capacity, how much can we take on? As the city also undertakes its own improvements within the public right of way, we also have certain drivers for our system. We want to make sure we're delivering this infrastructure improvements and these projects just in time, meaning the last thing we want is, we don't want to be the bottleneck in the process. We don't want to be the entity that essentially turns to development and says, you know, we can't have you connect. We always want to make certain we have capacity as growth occurs, that they are able to utilize our water and sewer system. There's also another important driver: funding. Sometimes we get federal funding, sometimes we get state funding, and those grants and those loans and those funding mechanisms often have timelines that you have to execute. So you're absolutely right. I mean, we are seeing a big push this year. Frankly, our big push is not just in the city of Moreno Valley, where there's other projects that are funded by American Rescue Plan Act funding and other federal funding. But for us to be able to utilize that funding, we have to get these projects done within a very limited time frame. Otherwise, we lose that funding. So I don't disagree with what you're saying. I fully understand your concern. What I will tell you, though, is we utilize many different contractors to be able to get this work done that we described. And Sean can talk a little further about execution, everything we do to make sure we execute those projects. Sean.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess one of the things about paving and whatnot, we've heard it loud and clear. We've actually made changes through our specifications on some of the pave back requirements so that the temporary paving is smoother, the rideability is good. It is my personal pet peeve for me. I've instructed my inspection staff that they need to drive the pavement that was laid down, and if it's bumpy, we need to get the contractor to address it. Some of the larger projects, like the one on Alessandro Boulevard that you referenced, that would start in 2027 and go to 2030, we're setting that contract up to do restoration as we go. From a cost efficiency standpoint, you want the contractors to come out once, do the work, and head out their way. So paving, there's temporary paving, and then you usually have the finished paving come through in one fell swoop. Due to the size of the project you referenced, ma'am, we are going to break that up. So there'll be smaller sections that are fully paved and restored back to their, not waiting for the end of the project. In terms of your question and comment on execution and how we're going to get it all done, my team's working about 140 projects right now. Our goal last year, it was to execute that fullest. We actually executed at 104% of plan. So from a capacity standpoint, we're on track to do somewhere between 90 and 95% of our plan this year. So we've got the staff, we've got the team, we've got the processes in place. Sometimes just the course of construction, the inconvenience that it is, not everything can happen as perfectly as we would like, but we are making efforts and changes through the construction process to make sure that it's better in instances. And as Joe said, with our public affairs, we want the calls coming to us, not to you, since they are our projects, so that we can address those immediately. Melissa and I talk fairly regularly. Text messages fly back and forth, emails when we hear things that are happening both from our side and from her side, so that we're making sure that we're responding to the public concerns and trying to get there before they get to you. So thank you.
I have a question. Going on the fire resiliency section of your presentation, what the devastation that the fires caused in the areas of Los Angeles, and looking at your colleagues on that side of LA. What were the areas of concern that we can do here? Something that was highlighted based on the response, and is if you can speak to that, if there was something that maybe we should be investing in infrastructure here, or have those areas of concern that rose from that been addressed? Just want to hear your feedback on that.
It's a great question, Council Member. So there's still a lot to learn from the fires that occurred in LA. I think we're still trying to digest exactly what could have been done differently. And I know my colleagues at LADWP and in the city of Altadena are still trying to investigate how things happen so quickly. But as I said, sometimes with wildfires, the pace of how quickly that fire approached, and frankly, I would suspect that there were dozens and dozens of hydrants being operated, and that essentially lowered the pressure. If not, they lost pressure in the system. So to your point, what can we learn and what can we do? And last week I worked closely with the County Riverside Chief Operating Officer, and we held a call with the fire chief as well as the other agencies within Riverside County to brainstorm how can we better work together. And working together, everything from when you have a emergency operations center or EOC activated, how can we make sure the lines of communication are flowing very quickly between the county and us and the cities? That way we're deploying the right resources and we're not getting in each other's way during such an event. But it's also looking at further investments in reliability and redundancy, such as heli hydrants. Can we secure funding so that we can have additional heli hydrants in our service territory? I mentioned all the different reservoirs, Lake Skinner, Lake Paris, Diamond Valley Lake, but if the fire marshal feels that they need more access points, then perhaps there's a way to secure state funding or other funding to be able to make those types of improvements. And again, the heli hydrants are just a way that the helicopter can extract essentially water from a storage tank. So I think we're also working on something that perhaps is not as visible. And we feel that it's important. Having experienced the fires in LA, there is a need to maybe re-engage with the regulators regarding certain requirements that are currently imposed on us that we feel may be an impediment in response to a fire. For example, right now, all of us are subject to the electrification of our fleets by the California Air Resources Control Board, by CARB. Well, the reality is when we had deployed those dozens of generators, we had to fuel them with diesel. We had to run heavy trucks to deliver diesel around the clock to keep those generators running. If our trucks had to be electric vehicles, it would have been very problematic for us. So what we're talking about as a region, is there a way to re-engage to make sure, for example, agencies like us have the same exemptions as first responders. First responders are exempt from the electrification requirements for fleets. We feel that as a water agency, we should be in that same category. So we also feel that the fires have allowed us to take a step back and think about regulations that perhaps need to be more common sense or maybe adjusted to address some of these types of events. So we're working with others to advocate accordingly. I don't know if I was able to address your question, Colin.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure.
Well, I think they've asked most of my questions, just two left. There was concerns about power, that there was no, without the power, the pumps can't go. Have you done anything to address like generators for the pumps so that we don't come into those same situations?
We have. To your point, Mayor Pro Tem, we have both permanent generators at many of our sites, but we also have portable generators that we roll out. Whenever there's a PSPS event, we get notifications. We deploy those immediately to what are high-risk areas that are likely to be shut off from the power grid. So absolutely, we do all of those things to make sure all of our facilities are powered through such an event.
And then I just wanted to bring to your attention that we, when you are doing construction, at times we get complaints that they think it's us, first of all, that's why we're getting the complaints, but that the crews aren't cleaning up the area before they shut down for the day. So I just want to bring that to your attention.
We'll make sure, we have inspectors for all of our construction sites. We have an EMWD inspector that's out there monitoring. I'm not saying that sometimes perhaps something may have been missed. We will make sure we alert our inspectors. But also, again, all of our project sites, they should have signage with clear contact information in case someone from the public or the city sees something that needs to be addressed. By all means, give us a call. We will get on it right away.
Do we have any public comments? Okay. Well, thank you. That would be the end. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda will be City Attorney will give a presentation on summary of the Brown Act and conflict of interest laws and regulations.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. I'm Stephen Quintanilla, your city attorney. And today I've been asked to do a presentation summarizing the Brown Act and our general conflict of interest regulations. But before I start, I'd like to mention that unfortunately, wordly does not translate legalese into plain English. So I will try to do my best job. Also, I just want to let you all know that we're not going to discuss all the nuance associated with the Brown Act and conflict of interest laws. You get that through your 2-hour required ethics training. And the intent here is not to answer any specific questions regarding any fact-specific hypotheticals. Okay, so if you have any of those kind of questions, you can give me a call, text me, come meet with me, and we can walk through those. So again, this is just a general summary of our laws regarding the Brown Act and conflict of interest. So the Brown Act is a state law, and it requires open and public meetings. But what's interesting about the Brown Act is that it's also a constitutional right. So in the state constitution, it provides that the public, members of the public, have a right to open and public meetings, so they can understand basically what you're doing with their tax dollars. So that's the general foundation for the Brown Act. So the Brown Act, the general rule here is requires meetings of legislative bodies to be open and public. What does open and public mean? Well, we have to provide public notice of our meetings as to where they're going to take place, when, and what we're going to discuss. We have to post agendas in advance of our meetings, from 1 hour for emergency meetings, 24 hours for special meetings, and 72 hours for regular meetings. We have to make sure all of our locations or venues are accessible to the public. Our agendas have to be agenda items have to be properly described, and even though there's a general rule that provides it should be about 20 words or less, that's almost impossible to do with most of our projects and other items that appear on our agenda, but it's not a violation of the law. We also have to allow public participation. We'll talk about that later. All your deliberation and voting has to take place on the open. So this is all just general information that you already know. So what's a legislative body? That's also another easy question to answer. It's the city council and all of your advisory commissions, committees, and boards. We have Planning Commission, Arts Commission, Emerging Leaders Council, and etc. So all of those are subject to the Brown Act. So what's a legislative body? That also includes standing committees. Now, a standing committee is a group of individuals who are granted what is called continuing subject matter jurisdiction over an issue. And these are created by the city council. They can be created by some of your commissions. So anytime you create a standing committee, and it's subject to the Brown Act. A standing committee can also be a group of individuals that are assigned a fixed meeting schedule, either set by ordinance, resolution, or minute order. And we do have some standing committees in the city. Patty, would you kind of run through those real quick?
Thank you, City Attorney. We sure do. So some of our standing committees that we have currently are Finance, Public Safety, Economic Development, and Parks and Community Services.
Thank you. So what's not a legislative body? They're the ad hoc subcommittees. Sometimes we call them subcommittees, sometimes we call them ad hoc committees, but basically what they are is that they're these bodies that are created by the city council that consist of less than a quorum of the council. So in this case, it can't be more than 2 of you. You deal with a specific issue for a limited period of time, and that's what this temporary jurisdiction is all about. So if you want to create an ad hoc subcommittee that's exempt from the Brown Act, meaning that they can go out and meet over lunch to discuss issues or meet at each other's homes to discuss issues without an agenda, you should stay focused on assigning a specific task for a limited duration of time. Private entities also could be subject to the Brown Act and be deemed legislative bodies if the city council creates them and delegates authority to them to make decisions or to provide advice to the city council. Or you can also create a private entity. A private entity could be subject to the Brown Act. We're talking about their governing boards. If you fund the organization, if you include a member of the city council that's appointed by the city council to their board, and that council member has full voting rights. So there have been situations where some cities will be asked by the local chamber of commerce for money, they get money, and the council says in exchange for that, we want to appoint a member of our council there and give that council member full voting rights. That would turn that Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors into a legislative body covered by the Brown Act. Now, the only example that we have here of this situation is our community foundation. Some cities will create these sister city boards, and they're typically subject to the Brown Act because they get funding. There's usually a member or 2 members put on their boards to vote. And so that, that's how they create these, that's how you get the private entities subject to the Brown Act. Now, the Brown Act always talks about a quorum. And typically a quorum means a majority of the city council. But the city council can create, and you have created several commissions, boards, and committees that define quorum as less than a majority. And one of the things that we have to be, that complicates this situation is when they want to create subcommittees. Because again, a subcommittee cannot consist of more than a quorum or more. And so we do have some, we have some commissions and boards, and
We do.
I think you have the list.
So those that have quorum are the Environmental Historical Preservation Board, Parks, Senior Citizens Advisory, the Arts Commission, and then the Traffic Safety has, well, their quorum totals 4, but the rest are 3.
Yeah, so we had a situation with one particular board where they wanted to appoint a subcommittee, and we ended up with a subcommittee of 1 because of this restriction. And that particular board has actually requested to get rid of that provision because now we're having them show up. And I gather that the reason why the quorum was established at 3 or 4 is because there was difficulty getting a quorum to show up for some of these commission and board meetings. So let's catch our breath. So the Brown Act, again, is a state law. It's a constitutional right. We talked about the open and public meeting components. We talked about what a legislative body is, what is not a legislative body, and a quorum. But the components of the Brown Act consist of 4, there's 4 components. You have to have a congregation of a majority. They meet at the same time and location, including teleconference locations, and there's some nuance to this that we'll talk about in regards to some of the new technology that we have in place since the Brown Act was adopted. The third component is that you're there to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action. What's critical about this is hearing. I get a lot of folks telling me, "Oh, we're just there to hear." Well, it actually says hear. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be talking to one another in order to violate the Brown Act if you're out there meeting as a majority. And the item that's being discussed has to be within your subject matter jurisdiction. What does that mean? That basically means any issue that has to be approved or considered by the city council. So anything that potentially could show up on your agenda for your consideration is within your subject matter jurisdiction. Here's some of the things that we have to be careful with respect to congregation of a majority. Sometimes you're asked to tour a proposed project site. No, because you're going to be there hearing possibly from an applicant or from a staff member about this proposed project. And again, it's to hear. Sometimes city councils will have retreats. Those would be subject to the Brown Act if anybody plans on discussing future policies or future projects. So, when we talk about a majority congregating, we have to keep that in consideration anytime there's any plans to have you out there in the field meeting with applicants, meeting with neighborhood groups, but there are ways around that, and we'll talk about those exceptions. A meeting at the same time and location includes communications via email, text, post-its, staff, applicants, social networking. So it's not always physical. We're talking about remote meetings. I highlight here again because this is where most people get in trouble. Oh, we didn't discuss anything, but you were hearing something. So I have here, you can hang out at the beach together, you can go to a funeral together, you can have a picnic, but you cannot start talking about anything within your subject matter jurisdiction, but you can talk about the weather, you can talk about personal matters, and you can talk about national affairs. Now, the Brown Act also has these exemptions, and we call them statutory exemptions, like the statutory exemptions we see under CEQA. These are just exemptions that are built into the state law. And one of the exemptions is the individual contacts. And so although you can have individual contacts and individual meetings with staff, applicants, and constituents, there are other concerns that are beyond the Brown Act that you need to be careful about, and here's a list of them. You have to be careful about the serial meetings. So if you have a meeting with an applicant, you can't ask that applicant, can you go talk to council member, the District 4? And then after District 4, can you talk to District 2? That is considered to be a serial meeting. You also have to be careful about meeting with applicants on a one-to-one basis or their representatives, because we require lobbyists to register with the city clerk's office. So and this doesn't apply to attorneys who are representing applicants. So if you have an applicant who wants to meet with you, they might say, well, you're not subject to the Brown Act. Keep in mind that, well, if you're a lobbyist and you're an applicant, you need to go register with the city clerk's office. You also have to be careful about discussing contracts that you have a financial interest in. Whether it's an employer, who has an interest in a contract that's being presented, you're absolutely prohibited from discussing the terms of that contract or anything about that contract with either, any applicant associated with that contract or the staff. You also have to be concerned about due process. If you're meeting individually with applicants out in the field or in your office, or even with your constituents, you got to be careful about not making any commitments about how you're going to vote. You got to be careful about expressing any opinions about the merits of the project before the project is actually presented to you. So that's really important. And just keep in mind, with due process issues, it affects not only the applicant, it also affects your constituents. So if you have constituents here who are opposed to a project and it's discovered that you've been having these legal meetings, legal with respect to the Brown Act, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're off the hook. Because if those discussions included any expressions of how you're going to vote on something, that's a violation of due process rights for your constituents who are opposed to that particular project. You also have to be cognizant that there's personnel policies that we have to be aware of, such as labor negotiations. Anytime we're engaged in formal labor negotiations and there's a policy adopted that prohibits council members from meeting with representatives of the employee organization, you have to be careful about those one-on-one contacts. And there are certainly, and then there's privacy concerns with particular employees. And finally, litigation. Anytime there's pending litigation, there's anticipated litigation, or there's any sort of potential exposure to litigation, you got to be careful about discussing those issues if the anticipated or potential litigation appears on a closed session agenda. You can attend conferences and seminars. Again, you can't meet off on the side in the lobby to talk about issues within your subject matter jurisdiction, but you may be able to step up sometimes at some of these Cal Cities conferences. They'll have a microphone up there. You can go up and speak. A majority of you can go up there and speak on that particular issue to the audience. The Brown Act also includes an exemption for open community meetings. These typically come up with homeowners association meetings or other community organizations such as your local Rotary Club, Seroptimus Club. If they're open, publicized meetings and they invite a majority of the council to come and listen and answer questions, that is permissible as long as your questions are you're answering a specific question that's being asked of you. But you can't turn to if there's three of you there, you can't turn to the other ones, well, how are you going to vote on that? Meetings of other legislative bodies. So if you create a standing committee, you can actually show up at that standing committee meeting as an observer. You can't show up there and comment as a citizen. If there's two of your colleagues there in the standing committee, and that's why it's a standing committee, you can't show up and participate in that meeting. You can show up at our regional commission meetings. A majority of you can show up. Again, that caveat, the caveats are here, the same across the board: due process issues, litigation, confidential matters. You don't talk about anything amongst the majority. The majority of you should not talk about anything within your subject matter jurisdiction. You can attend social and ceremonial gatherings, sporting events, holiday parties, same caveats there. Now let's talk about social media. Now this is one that has created a lot of chaos in the city attorney world and amongst the city councils of the world in California, because we have this very unique law, and I don't know if it's the only one no, it's not the only one in the country, because there's two circuit courts dealing with the same issue. But we have a law on the books that was adopted a few years ago that addresses social media. And basically what the law provides is that, or cautions you about, is posting comments and using emojis, because emojis are an expression of your opinion about certain issues. So when the law was first adopted, this applied in situations when there was a majority of the city council as members of a particular social networking platform like Facebook. And somebody would ask something about, I wonder, if the council supports this project, and thumbs up, smiley face, thumbs down. That's a majority there. And that would technically be a violation of the Brown Act. But it gets even worse now. So the law was amended to prevent any one of you from responding to any other member's post. Just another one. So outside the context of this law, that wouldn't be a violation of the Brown Act. But in the context of this law that's outside the Brown Act, that's a violation of that law. So now, do not, my advice, and I think I have a practice tip here, don't like another member's post, don't use emojis. And I suggest based on what's going on right now with the U.S. Supreme Court, that's going to take up these two different opinions, one from the Ninth Circuit and one I think is Fifth Circuit. They have contrary opinions on the issue of the use of your personal social networking sites. And so the advice that city attorneys are giving right now as a precautionary measure is to post on any of your personal pages the following. This personal page, don't use your title. This is a personal page of so-and-so. The views and opinions expressed on this site are strictly my own and constitute an exercise of my First Amendment rights as an individual citizen. So Ninth Circuit didn't recognize that as a First Amendment rights. The other circuit did. That you do not, I mean, it's standard legal, it's standard law in California that just because you get elected, you do not cede your First Amendment rights. So I anticipate with the Supreme Court, I'm predicting that when these two conflicting opinions come to them, I believe that they're going to render an opinion that allows you to put this disclaimer on there and be able to delete comments. As long as it's your personal page, the city is not paying for it, the city is not administering it, and the city's not involved whatsoever with it. But be careful about the use of your title. Because if you have your Facebook page and you list your title as mayor or council member, then it's natural for people to presume that they're speaking to you in your capacity as an elected official. But for now, I recommend that all of you on your personal social networking sites place this disclaimer. I'm not saying it's going to be a get out of the jail card for you, but I think that this is where we're heading, and this is going to restore your First Amendment rights on social networking sites. And of course, we can go into closed session for litigation matters, personnel matters, real property negotiations, and public security. There are a host of other reasons why we can go into closed session, but I didn't want to take up all that space here. Oh, and also want to point out too, just because the Brown Act provides that we can go into closed session on these issues doesn't mean we have to. So if a majority of the council prefers to talk about litigation out in the open, that's up to a majority of the city council. But that has to go into closed session first before that decision can be made. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. Let's talk about public participation. What I find interesting is that, and I've personally experienced this, that some school districts don't allow public comment until the item is actually voted on. I was there at this one school district meeting, and they didn't let me speak until they actually voted on the item. The Brown Act requires that you allow the public to comment before or during the item, not after you vote. Non-agenda items that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council, we have to allow the public to speak, except for special meetings and study sessions, which is kind of a special meeting. It's not a regular meeting, so it's really a special meeting. And so that's why the Mayor Pro Tem announced that you can comment about just what appears on the agenda today. We may not require a sign-in sheet as a prerequisite to speak. We do that for record keeping and for the minutes. But if somebody refuses to sign them, and I think we've had instances where people didn't want to sign them, they're allowed to come up and speak. However, in the context of a public hearing where evidence is important, where we're getting evidence presented through public testimony from members of the public, if they refuse to sign or state their name, or they refuse to identify their address, that affects their credibility. and the weight of the testimony that they offer. So if we get into litigation and we see comments like that and they're prejudicial to the city, we can actually request or file a motion for the judge to ignore that evidence because that individual did not provide a name or their place of residence. And we all know this, we may not prohibit criticism or complaints related to the duties and performance of not only the council members, but staff as well, including me. Public decorum. We may place time limitations. At one time, it was like 5 minutes and went down to 3 minutes. And now there's opinions out there go down to 1 minute. So we can place time limitations on speakers. We may adopt regulations, which you did, on actual disruptions of meetings. That was fairly new law that came about because things were happening at some of the school district meetings across the country. And so it's important to note it's actual disruption, not because we just don't like what we're hearing. We may prohibit offensive speech. I don't know what that means anymore because there's case law out there that holds that the F word is not offensive speech. And so I don't, it's like the definition of pornography. One Supreme Court justice says, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. That's difficult here now. So we're seeing right now offensive speech. I can't predict what it's going to be. I don't know if I can think of a worse word than the F word, but yeah, the F word's not offensive speech. I don't want to encourage anyone. And but we may prohibit comments on issues not within the subject matter jurisdiction of the city. So I know that in various jurisdictions, they're using this to take the position that they should not take positions on certain issues, and they're attempting to shut down speech. I would not encourage the city council to try to shut down speech on particular issues. Only because I anticipate that some courts throughout the country and in California will hold that, oh no, that may be a national issue, but that is within your subject matter jurisdiction. Not requiring you to vote one way or the other, but may require us to have to listen and sit through all those comments. Now let's move on to conflicts of interest. Now, the conflicts of interest laws and regulations come from various directions. We had the Political Reform Act that was adopted in 1974. That's the big body of law that first established conflict of interest regulations for the state of California. When the Political Reform Act was adopted, just like a lot of these big laws, they create these commissions. And so the Fair Political Practices Commission was created. And so the Fair Political Practice Commission was tasked with adopting regulations that are consistent with the rules and the rules and regulations in the Political Reform Act. And the Fair Political Practices Commission conducts hearings and based on complaints. So sometimes if there's a complaint filed against an elected official, that complaint will go to the Fair Political Practices Commission and they'll conduct an evidentiary hearing. And at the conclusion of that hearing, they can issue fines, and they can't issue jail time, but they can issue fines, but they also produce opinions. And when these opinions are produced, they're published. Everybody gets to see them. And they actually send out a list of opinions on a quarterly basis. And so sometimes I'm surprised, oh God, I didn't know that person had an issue. So it becomes very public. And we have to rely on these Fair Political Practices Commission opinions for purposes of interpreting certain regulations and certain laws under the Political Reform Act. There's also case law out there. So we have case law that go through our state courts and sometimes through the federal courts that deal with the issue of conflicts of interest. So oftentimes we have to look at the case law to make a determination as to whether or not there's a potential conflict of interest under a particular circumstance. Again, we have local regulations pertaining to lobbyists, and we have the Levine Act, which we're going to talk about, and Government Code Section 1090, which is interest in contracts. So those are the two next topics. But why is this important? Well, it's because it's all about divided loyalties. The public wants to know that you have your loyalty and undivided allegiance is to the city. That's what conflict of interest is all about. Why is it important? Well, it's important because we want to assure that anyone who comes before you and stands at this podium requesting a license or a permit or some sort of entitlement, that they're going to be afforded due process. I mean, that's what we all want if we show up in court, want due process. We want to assure the public that you're not biased and that you're going to be fair, which is part of due process, but somehow it's gotten out to become its own set of laws, bias and fairness. We want to maintain and promote public trust and respect, and it's also about personal integrity. And if that's not enough to encourage everyone, there are fines, and they can be big fines. In some cases, they can be $10,000, $1,000 or $10,000, or it could be 3 times the amount of the violation. For instance, there was a council member who had photocopied. Anyways, no, I'm not going to get in that. Anyway, so there are huge fines. Now, there are disgorgement. If we have a Section 1090 violation, we could actually sue the individual and disgorge all the money they made from their employer related to that contract. The person could be ordered to be removed from office and prohibited from running for office in the state of California forever, jail time, attorney's fees, and embarrassment. So I always encourage everyone, if this doesn't persuade you to, gain the public's trust, to provide due process, then think about the consequences. So here are some of the run-of-the-mill conflicts, and I call them run-of-the-mill conflicts because these are all the ones that show up, the Fair Political Practices Commission deals with often, and these are the primary ones. Anytime an applicant or somebody stands up here, if that person's a source of income for you, your antenna should go up. Like, oh, there might be an issue here. If the person standing up here gave you gifts, Patty, what's the annual gift? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I know you know this.
630?
Okay. Oh, I think you added it to there somewhere. Anyways, yeah, so keep in mind that anytime you receive a gift of values of $50 or more, and it can be an aggregate of gifts over a year, you have to report it. But there's an annual limitation. Over that, you're in big trouble. Source of personal loans, if you get a personal loan from somebody in the community or an applicant, and that person shows up here, that creates a potential conflict for you. This doesn't have to do with mortgages or any credit card loans. If the person standing up here is a former, current, or prospective employer, that can be an issue. A prospective employer is somebody who offers you a job at the time they have an item that's pending before the council. If you have an interest in real property that's going to be impacted by a decision, then that's a potential conflict of interest. In certain investments and dependent family members. A dependent family member is, somebody who's a dependent on your taxes, basically. But keep in mind, it's also an adult child who may be off to college, who's on your health insurance. If that adult child shows up here for anything, you have a conflict of interest. So, you all know this. most of us do this. We have to file these Form 700s, the financial disclosure statement, and we have to file it annually. Reminder while we're here.
Thank you, City Attorney. Yes, 700 forms are due April 1st of every year.
And they can file it online.
Yes, that is correct. File electronically.
And some get frustrated because they expect me to, walk them through this process, or expect the city clerk. We are very limited on the advice that we can give you on these, and so we always encourage you to contact the FPPC. So they have to be filed annually. It's important that if there's any changed circumstances that you file an amendment as soon as possible before the media picks up on it. I always disappointed when I see something, I'm not talking about us here, see something in the newspaper and think, oh my God, why didn't they just report that? So they're accused of violating the FPPC rules, and the comments that are generally put out there is that, well, no, they have time to file the amendment. But I always encourage you, if there's a change in your circumstances, file that amendment. And keep in mind, it's all self-reporting. It's not up to the staff to decide what you should report. We're not the police. Our advice to you is to file every April on time and disclose everything you're required to disclose. And if you have any questions, contact the FPPC. And the other thing I'd like to note too, that any advice I give you on conflict of interest, or the city clerk gives you on conflict of interest, or any of your staff members give you on conflict of interest, provides you with absolute no immunity. None. Zero, zilch. Even the FPPC gives you advice. No immunity. The only time you get immunity is if the FPPC gives you a letter that you've requested, was it 21 days in advance. If you have a situation that's coming up and you want to know whether or not you have a potential or actual conflict, we'll encourage you, well, we have a month. Why don't you submit a letter or send an email to the FPPC? And if you get a letter back, and based on the facts you gave them, and the facts are true, that's immunity. DA can't prosecute you. AG can't prosecute you. And you sign these under penalty of perjury too. Financial disclosure statement, you report your income sources, any interest in real property, except for your primary residence, certain types of investments. Oh, thank you, Patty. Put that in there, $630 annual limit on source of gifts. You have to report personal loans, travel payments, and include your spouse and dependent family members. So one note on travel payments. When California first became a state, there were absolutely no laws. It was like, there's no laws here. And so as they were putting together the Constitution, it was decided to make it prohibited under the Constitution to accept any travel from railroads, because the railroads were powerful back in the 1850s. And then since that time, they added any transportation agents, any transportation company. So you can't accept free travel or complimentary travel from a travel agency. That's different from having it provided to you from a nonprofit or from a conference organizer. Even free bus fare. I mean, technically, receiving free bus fare from Sunline Transit or some other transit agency is a violation of this constitutional prohibition. So don't be tempted by free bus fare. So if you do have a potential or an actual conflict of interest, you have to publicly disclose it here at the meeting. You have to recuse yourself from discussing or voting on the matter, and you have to leave the room. And we've seen that in some cases, unless the item is on consent. If the item's on consent, you actually don't have to leave the dais. You just got to zip it up. And I've seen some cases that deal with eye contact, expressions on, they sat there during consent, but they were giving the evil eye to somebody who's going to vote the other way. And that's come up. So again, here are some of the exceptions under these various conflict of interest rules. Consent calendar items, you don't have to leave, but you've got to recuse yourself. There's a rule of necessity, and what this rule is about is if we absolutely need everyone to vote on this matter. We have all 5 of you here, and let's say that it requires a supermajority vote of the council. And, or, you know, a certain, like a 4/5 vote, and we only have, well, no, that wouldn't work. Oh God, it just slipped my mind how this. Oh, yeah. If we have to, I'm trying to think of one of the rules that comes up where it requires a certain number of council members to vote, and oh, okay, I got it now. We lose a majority of you. 3 of you have a conflict, and there's only 2. The rule of necessity allows us to bring 1 back in, so we get a quorum. So let's limit it to that. If we need a quorum to vote. If we lose our quorum, become conflict of interest, we either draw straws and bring somebody back, or if the conflict is based on distance, we usually will invite the person who lives the furthest away from the project to come in to the fold to vote. Okay, so let's think of the rule of necessity from that perspective. It comes up every now and then because we get a grant and we're required to get a certain number of votes, things like that. Public employment, if your conflict is based on employment issues, but your employer is a public employer, then there's an exemption under the general conflict of interest rules. When we have a contract in place with a public employer that employs one of the council members, then we may fall under this remote exception provision if we're hiring from a particular department that person does not work for. You know, so that exception comes up. But anytime the conflict is based on public employment, there are exceptions, and there's a lot of nuance with public employment issues. The public generally exception is when you have a conflict, let's say it's based on the location of your residence, you live within 100 feet of a, or you own real property within 100 feet, or a business within 100 feet from a particular project. Well, if the impact of that project is going to impact you in a similar way as it's going to impact everybody else, then even though you have a potential conflict, you can come back in under this public generally exception. I think the easiest example is, let's say that you own a liquor store and the city council wants to prohibit liquor stores. Well, since that involves all liquor stores, then you could be invited back in to vote and discuss on that matter, even though you own a liquor store. So that's how that public generally exception applies in some instances. If it's your primary residence, you can comment about it. You can, talk about the impacts on your primary residence, as long as it's truly your primary residence. If you're on a month-to-month lease, that's exempt from from conflict of interest analysis, or you've received gifts of less than $50. Okay, let's talk about real quickly about these specialized conflicts. That's Section 1090, the form of self-dealing conflict. This is when we have a financial interest in a council member has a financial interest in a contract. If you have a financial interest in the contract, and again, there's nuance to this, but let's just say it's plain and clear you have a financial conflict of interest, the city may not even enter into that contract. The city cannot even amend that contract. So that's the consequences we run into when we have a council member who has a financial interest in a contract. Again, there are some exceptions, there are minor exceptions, and that's why I put it in with minor exceptions, some minor exceptions. I put that in fine print because that's what we're always looking at when this issue comes up, is that are there any exceptions? And the exceptions are very, very narrow. Now, if you have an interest in a contract, you can't even talk to staff. You can't ask them any questions. You can't talk to the city clerk and ask what's going to be on the agenda. Absolute prohibition on any discussion or communication with anybody at City Hall about that particular contract. Consequences. Now, this is a really dire, you get yourself in a dire situation under Section 1090. The city can actually void the contract and get the benefits of that contract. There was a situation in the city of Albany where there was a council member who had sold a bunch of buses to the school district. And then she voted for the city to buy more buses without disclosing that she owned the bus company. The city got the free buses to give to the school district, and the city was able to disgorge her of any money she made, including income from that bus purchase. And she was required to pay restitution for any payments that were made by the city. It's a felony conviction. I don't know if she got fined or served in state prison, but she got hit with hundreds of thousands of dollars in civil and administrative fees. She's prohibited from running from office, but I believe that the worst thing that happened to her were the attorney's fees. So even though the city has an obligation under certain circumstances to indemnify this council for certain actions, this is not one of them. You're on your own. Okay, the Levine Act. We talked about the Levine Act when it was first adopted, and so I'm going to go quickly through this because there's been some changes that took effect January 1st of this year. The limit has gone from $250 to $500, and so basically any applicant for a license or permit or other entitlement who has given a campaign contribution of $500 or more within the prior 12 months has to disclose that. This is an interesting aspect of our conflict of interest of laws because we impose a burden now on the applicant, the source of that potential conflict. They have to disclose it. The applicant's also prohibited from giving a campaign contribution exceeding $500 12 months following a decision. And there are exceptions, and with respect to PACs. So we're not going to get on those. We're past the campaign season. Council members, you have to recuse yourself if you got a campaign contribution from the applicant standing up here within the previous 12 months that exceed $500, more than $500. You have to disclose that, who gave it to you, how much it was, when. And if you want to cure the situation and vote, you have to return that contribution within 30 days after receiving the contribution. But typically it's going to be too late by the time the election passes and we get here. Now, here's one of the interesting nuances of the Levine Act, which is, everybody's just waiting for somebody to get sued over this so we know what's going on. Participants. So the Levine Act provides that you can't take, if you take more than $500 in a campaign contribution from a participant, the same rules apply. You have to disclose, you can't vote. Well, what's a participant? A participant can mean somebody, let's say, who owns a business in town, and they don't want a competing business to be approved by the council. So they give you a campaign contribution. Please vote against that business. It could be somebody who, speaking on behalf of a community association, and they give you a campaign contribution, and their community opposes that project. That's what a participant is. So when we look back at some of the issues that have come before this council on some of the big projects, some of the folks that stood up here could be considered participants under the Levine Act. And that's a huge surprise to some of the members of the public who don't know they're participants. So we have to watch for things like that. But again, what is good about the Levine Act, though, it doesn't require you to inquire about whether or not you're a participant. So nobody's under any obligation here at the city to ask this individual who lives in that community, who's opposed to that project, did you give a campaign contribution? There's no duty to disclose on behalf of the participant, where there is on behalf of the council member who gets the contribution and on behalf of the applicant who gives the contribution, but not a participant. And, and then applicants' representatives. So it can be, their engineer, it could be their, it can be their engineer or their attorney or their architect. And so this gets really convoluted because oftentimes we don't know who these people are who are standing up here. And so here's a definition, how a participant is defined. It's somebody who actively supports or opposes a particular decision, and they have a financial interest in that decision. And what's a financial interest? If it's an impact, if there's going to be a potential impact on their business, and they have a direct or indirect investment, $2,000 or more in that business, then they're a participant. If they're concerned about impact on real property that they own and not excludes their primary residence, and they have an investment $2,000 or more in that real property, then they are a participant. And again, this is going to be flushed out in court opinions someday soon. And again, we have no affirmative obligation to ask or inquire, are you a participant? Did you give a campaign contribution? You don't even have to ask that, because sometimes you don't know where some of these campaign contributions are coming from. And of course, again, with PACs, those are generally excluded. So here's the conclusion. You can try me first. I give you no immunity. But we always refer you to the Fair Political Practice Commission, and here's their FPPC phone number, and you can send them emails. But most importantly, I suggest to everyone, you just trust your gut feeling, because we all have a conscience. We all know in our gut that something may not be right. And so that's one of the primary purposes of a presentation like this, is just to help you spot issues. I don't expect anyone to remember all these rules and regulations, even the general ones we just discussed. All the nuance is difficult for anyone to fully comprehend and remember. But I always suggest trust your gut feeling. And if there's something that doesn't feel right, that should prompt you to ask questions. Ask a department director that you're talking to, ask the city clerk, ask the city attorney's office. You're going to end up with the FPPC. But that's what your gut feeling should tell you. I got to ask a question because it seems like there's an issue here. So the conclusion is, and I expanded this quote. Somebody printed this one time, and I thought, oh, wow, I didn't know somebody was listening. So it's all about protecting the taxpayers' investment in public property and resources, respecting the rights of city staff, and protecting the integrity of local elections and the public decision-making process, which all builds trust and confidence in local government. So there you go. And unfortunately, it doesn't count toward your 2 hours of ethics training.
Thank you so much for that report, Steve. Do we have any public comments? None? Okay. We'll take questions or comments from the dais.
Thank you very much for that. That was a lot packed into 1 hour, and great refresher. It was about an hour. Great refresher. There was some of the stuff that was review, but a lot of it was new. So thank you very much for that. And what if we had I'm just kidding. No scenarios. Thank you, Steve.
Steve, just say thank you. Thank you for your presentation, and it was like Councilmember Delgado said, it's a refresher and a lot of updates, and yeah, let's make the city proud when we make these decisions and make sure we're transparent in everything we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There being no further business to this study session, the study session is adjourned at 7:41 p.m. Good night.